I recently finished watching Hunter x Hunter, the 2011 anime series. Going into it, I had very little expectations, but surprisingly, I was still disappointed. The main reason why I had such little expectations is because it's a shonen. I do not like shonens. I know people like to define Hunter x Hunter as a deconstruction of shonen. I disagree. My main gripe with Hunter x Hunter as a series is the action and how Nen ruins it. When Nen was introduced, the series took a massive blow to the point where I found it difficult to continue watching for a couple reasons. The first being when it was introduced into the story, the 28th episode. During episodes 1 through 27, I found myself getting into the promise the story world had, but then they introduced a massively impactful concept that affects everything and completely changes the story. I get that because the audience experiences the story and story world primarily through Gon, a stupid little baby, it makes sense that the audience doesn't learn about Nen until Gon does, which happens to be the 28th episode. I'm just saying that it felt like a massive curveball to the story as a whole because of when it was introduced. The second reason, I immediately just saw Nen as an extremely cheap writing tool. This concept tries to be justified with rules. For example, a master emitter cannot also be a master conjurer. So already with this simple rule, there's a lot of arbitrary stuff going on, like this Nen chart. On it, it says emission 100%, conjuration 40%. What does this mean? What is that 40% conjuration? What I get from this is that anyone can do anything, but certain people can do certain things stronger than others. Not only that, but this chart seems to be abandoned as the story moves on, because the characters can just choose their ability, furthering the nonsense of Nen. Which would be fine if those things were more straightforward, but they're not at all. It's magic. Also on this Nen chart, there's the Specialist tab, which, from my understanding, means that person who is a specialist has some busted as fuck power. Another rule for Nen is the conditions and vows. For example, Kurapica can only use his Nen against the spider troop. The trade-off being if he uses it on someone or something else, he will die. But he's OP against the troop. The problem with this condition rule is that they can make up the conditions themselves anytime, anywhere, completely undermining the whole purpose of the condition rule. The purpose being to add more tension. And on top of that, there are no apparent rules for these conditions, meaning these conditions can be anything. So in my opinion, the Nen system completely removes all tension from every fight scene, because at any time in any fighting scene, anything can happen, resulting in empty sequences that are only flashy and nothing more. What do I mean by anything can happen? Let's use the Kurapica versus Uvojin fight as an example. The fight starts off with some flashy stuff, Kurapica's chains exploding through stone, and Uvojin dodging them. After realizing Kurapica's chains have an abnormal amount of Nen, Uvojin successfully punches Kurapica's arm, yet the punch left Kurapica unscathed. Uvojin then tries to deduce what Kurapica's strengths are. He must be a conjurer or manipulator because of the special chains, but only an enhancer can block the punch as he did. Then comes the, "Was that the best you got?" Uvojin responds with, "That was only 20%. This time I'll use half." Side note, this is a great time to point out the common use of numbers in Hunter x Hunter's action. This is bad. This is the most basic way of telling action, the result being incredibly one-dimensional. In this example, a better way to do it would be to completely ditch the numbers entirely and just show a character wasn't trying their hardest by having their eyes go pure white when they get strong or something like that, rather than just have the character say, "I wasn't even trying." Another problem with that was only 20% is that you can just continue to add to that. The character can continue to go harder and harder until what is needed to be done to progress the plot, becoming so contrived and just bad. Anyways, back to the fight. Kurapica tells Uvojin to stop making excuses and you're wasting my time, which I find to be ironic and completely agree with him. Uvojin punches Kurapica's arm, but this time it actually does damage because he used Nen technique where you can conceal your aura's presence. Another stupid writing tool, but okay, let's put that aside. Alright, what's Kurapica's response? It turns out he wrapped Uvojin with his chains. How? The chains were fortified with the conjurer's Nen, meaning he could use In to render them invisible. Oh, of course, right. And it wasn't until Kurapica pointed it out that Uvojin noticed them, using Gyo, which is when you put Nen in your eyeballs so that you can see the Nen tricks people use. Why didn't Uvojin notice this earlier? Well, that's when the story mechanics surface, and in good storytelling, these story mechanics never expose themselves. In good storytelling, the story feels natural, not mechanical. Kurapica then goes on a rant how the chains Uvojin saw were just bluffs, and that while Uvojin was making the empty threats, Kurapica wrapped the real chains around his body. This is again what I mean by anything can happen. Earlier, while Uvojin was making the empty threats, as the audience, we don't know that Kurapica wrapped the invisible chains around Uvojin. It wasn't until later that we as the audience are told about the real chains. This is another common misstep with the action in Hunter x Hunter. It's the middle of a fight, the fighting stops briefly so that one of the characters can be used as a mouthpiece to tell the audience about something they did earlier in the fight. Something that the audience had no way of knowing what that character did. So here we are, Kurapica has Uvojin chained up. It's safe to say that Kurapica has won, but is it? Although the answer is yes, Kurapica does have Uvojin truly chained up. At this point, he wins. However, now Uvojin could do the same thing. When I punched your arm, it wasn't just your arm that I cracked, it was also your aura. Then he screams and breaks the chains or some bullshit like that. Back to the fight, Uvojin brings up the Nen categories, again trying to make sense of Kurapica, saying, a Nen user can only fully master their innate category. This Nen category stuff would be a lot better if the specialist wasn't a category, because from my understanding, these Nen rules don't apply to specialists. Oh, also, Kurapica can just heal his arm that is only broken after receiving a punch from Uvojin. Again, just completely taking away any sort of suspense. Kurapica explains to Uvojin, or should I say the audience, why he chose Uvojin, which is fine, but then he explains how his chains forcefully activates Zetsu upon any troop member it ensnares. It also paralyzes them, and that Zetsu nullifies aura. This is the type of writing that reminds me of my childhood when I would pretend fight against my brother. I have a shield that can block anything. Well, I have a gun that shoots bullets that can shoot through your shield. Kurapica then places a conditional bond on Uvojin's heart, with the condition if he doesn't answer his questions honestly, his heart will explode. Uvojin refuses to tell Kurapica where the spider troop is, and dies. This was not bad. It had me asking the question if Uvojin is going to tell Kurapica the location of the spider troop, which is a good thing, but I can't help but feel that the action prior to this took a lot away from the scene, making it feel a lot less meaningful. Let's take a look at what good action looks like. The 1997 Berserk anime series, when Guts fights the 100 mercenaries. The reason why I decided to make this as an example, Jesus, is because of how well it uses tension. The tension with this fight scene begins in episode 11, when the Band of the Hawk go into a battle against Tudor. Casca begins her period, not wanting to give into the idea that a woman is less than a man on a battlefield, or that she couldn't be Griffith's chosen friend because of her being a woman. She fights on. As the battle progresses, the symptoms and fever become too much. She falls off a cliff, and Guts goes after her. They are washed down river. Guts finds a cave where he nurtures Casca back to health over the course of at least a few days. During this time, Guts doesn't know the status of the battle against Tudor, meaning they could be ambushed by the enemy at any time, creating a great foundation of tension. During this very important time, Guts and Casca's relationship becomes something much more, adding more to the tension of the 100 mercenary fight. Eventually, Casca recovers enough to put on her equipment and walk. While the two are searching for the Band of the Hawk, it becomes apparent that Casca hasn't made a full recovery. They then are ambushed by Adon Korbelwitz and a band of mercenaries that he hired. Another reason why I'm using this as an example is because the action itself is flashy in a different capacity. The physical motions are simply enough, with some flashy coloring and camera work. It's like with writing action in a normal book, a book that has just words. It's very common for the author to avoid describing every detail of a fight, to avoid losing the reader in the words. They describe simply enough action for the reader to follow what is happening, as long as why this action started, happens, and concludes is portrayed being the main goal. A common theme that I find among shonens with fighting scenes is that the main goal is to make the actual action to be as flashy and cool as possible. Casca fends off a few of the mercenaries, but very clumsily, further showing the audience of her condition, yet she still doesn't give in, telling Guts that she can still fight. Guts starts fragging. Casca takes out a couple more, but again, only just. While she tries to catch her breath, Guts approaches her back, giving her confidence, a reminder of her own mission to prove she's not weak. Adon calls forth his brute brother Samson, who swings around this gargantuan flail that can smash through tree and stone with ease. Amidst the 100 mercenaries, and now Samson, Guts doesn't budge, blocking a barrage of attacks from the flail, causing disbelief from the crowd. Adon misjudges the situation, thinking Guts isn't dodging Samson's attacks because of their incredible speed. However, this is not the case. Casca recognizes that Guts could easily dodge out of the way and charge with his sword drawn. The real reason he is blocking the attacks is to protect her. While he is blocking the attacks, Casca notices that Guts' arrow wound that he took from Adon Korbelwitz to save her from episode 11 has yet to heal. Guts tells Casca that he is going to clear a pathway for her escape. Before Casca can respond, Guts charges Samson with his sword drawn, striking the massive flail, causing it to shatter into many pieces. Before we continue, I would like to say that a crucial element for action in storytelling is to keep it believable. At first glance, this doesn't seem believable. However, I do think it is. For Guts' sword is from the legendary blacksmith Godo, and the narrative of the Korbelwitz family being weak and fake could easily be assumed for their gear as well. How would you make the Nen system believable? For starters, it's definitely not this. Let's use Killua as an example. Later on in the story, he gives himself the ability of lightning. He can run really fast, punch really fast, and use metal yo-yos to do some cool lightning attacks with. To make this believable is to keep it consistent, meaning Killua can only do things that lightning can do. It would be very unbelievable if Killua used lightning to heal someone, or read someone's mind, or create some sort of lightning shield that blocked an incoming attack. Guts clears a path by killing Samson. He then yells at Casca that now's her chance to get out of there, but she refuses to leave him behind. He takes more arrows to save her because of her stubbornness. I won't go into detail with it, but the building of Guts' and Casca's relationship adds to the tension because you're beginning to realize that their relationship can be something so much more than just them constantly at odds with each other. An ally on the battlefield, the potential strong friendship that is created from fighting in many battles together, maybe even lovers. However, you as the audience don't know if that will come to be because of the grim situation they find themselves in. Casca asks Guts why. He gives a response that would get her to leave. What Guts says is huge for many reasons, but for the context of this video, it buffs the tension significantly because of your want for their potential relationship. And obviously, there won't be that relationship if Guts dies. Another extremely common theme among most shonens, if not every single one, is the fundamental problem of plot armor. At no point in Hunter x Hunter was I questioning if Gon was going to die or not, because of the simple rule that if Gon dies, the story ends. With the 1997 Berserk anime series, if Guts died, yes, the story would take a massive blow and be ruined, but the main difference being Guts was never put into a situation where the outcome was contrived due to great writing. Guts surviving the 100 mercenary fight is not contrived, whereas Gon being revived by Aluka after the Pitu fight is extremely contrived. After what Guts said, Kasuga finally decides to run, promising Guts that she will bring back reinforcements. Now that the two are split, this exponentially adds to the tension because now it's effectively doubling the questions from the audience. What will happen to Kasuga now that she doesn't have the protection of Guts? Will she be able to find the reinforcements? What will happen to Guts? How will he deal with this insurmountable task of facing a horde of mercenaries by himself? How will he make it out alive? Is he going to die? Adon Korbelwitz sends a few mercenaries off to chase Kasuga as Guts gets fragging. As he kills more and more, he says how his sword is dull from all the killing. This could be seen as Guts just being a mouthpiece to tell the audience his sword is dull. But he also says how his sword is 3 times as thick and 3 times as devastating as a normal sword, to strike more fear into his already scared enemies. I personally think that this works. Both of these things, he says, are totally believable and as a result only add to the tension. Whereas saying you're only at 20% power is childish and a flat-out parody of intimidation. Adon Korbelwitz tries to rally the mercenaries with some encouraging words, but is unsuccessful. So he then says he would pay 5 times the amount and a promotion, furthering the difference in skill between Guts and the mercenaries, showing the audience the mercenaries don't have their heart into this battle, thus, in turn, furthering the believability of Guts fragging as many as he has. As Kasuga is running, some mercenaries understandably catch up because of her condition. Another way of increasing the tension is the pacing of the 2 points of view, cutting between Kasuga as she runs for her life and Guts as he fights for his life. Guts gets shot at by crossbows, escaping most, but not all, preventing one of the bolts from going into his head by blocking it with his hand, thus obviously crippling it and buffing the tension because now he can't wield his sword as effectively. The attacks from the mercenaries are beginning to connect as Guts is no longer able to block effectively. Kasuga falls to the ground, unable to run any longer, barely has the strength to wield her sword. The mercenaries catch Kasuga, and to put it lightly, things don't go well for her for a bit. Judo saves her as she is about to get killed by the mercenaries. This could be seen as a deus ex machina, however, I think it works, because Guts and Kasuga, 2 highly ranked and highly important members of the Band of the White Hawk, have been missing for days, and surely with Adon Korbelwitz ambushing the 2, the Band of the White Hawk won the battle that got the 2 in this situation in the first place. Adon Korbelwitz says,
"Unbelievable! Despite his wounds, he's beaten nearly half of my 100 men!"
Guts responds with,
"So there are still 50 of you left standing. At this rate, it'll be done before I can crack open all of your skulls."
This brings attention to how exhausting this must be, fighting just for a few hours, much less all night. Again, buffing the tension. When Judo finds Kasuga, she falls into his arms, exhausted to a point where she can hardly stand, not only showing how bad of a shape she is in, but personally, I ask myself, if she's in that bad of shape, imagine Guts, and he's still fighting. Again, buffing tension. At no point in Hunter x Hunter did I find a fight exhausting. Exhausting meaning in a good way. Again, another potential element that can be added to action that is taken away due to Nen. A problem with having very powerful characters is that at any point, one of the participants of a fight can decide to use an overpowered move that ends the fight. The best examples of this is with this Spider Troop, when Uvojin used his Big Bang Impact on the Shadow Beasts, which he could have done against Kurapica if he decided to actually use 100% of his power. Or literally every single fight with the Spider Troop when they infiltrated the Chimera Ant Nest. Kaitan's Pain Packer, Bono Lenov's Jupiter, Shalnark's Autopilot Mode, Shizuku's Blinky, Finks's Ripper Cyclotron, Kaluto Zoldik's Meandering Dance. Every single one of these fights is just when the Spider Troop member decides to use their overpowered ability. Anyways, back to Berserk. On our way to Guts with reinforcements is when the tension is at its highest, the moment before the reveal. It shows the sun rising over tree-covered hills and birds chirping as Kasuga and the reinforcements arrive to the battle scene, showing the audience how far Kasuga ran and how long Guts fought. They arrive to a menacing scene, a forest floor covered in butchered dead bodies. Judo is in disbelief that one man could do this. They then see the man that did this, mangled, sitting against a tree and around his heavily worn sword. Kasuga runs to him desperately, trying to wake him up. He's alive, telling her,
Please stop shaking me. It doesn't seem to be helping the pain.
The climax of the action storyline, the payoff of the tension. The pacing of Guts killing the mercenaries is important, because if he just frags all the mercenaries as if they're nothing, then you would lose crucial tension. An example for the pacing and tension of this specific point in the action scene, let's use a line, an action storyline. The beginning of the line being when Kasuga decides to run for reinforcements, and the end being the climax, when Kasuga comes back with reinforcements. So ideally you would like the line to continually rise with the tension, but if the pacing is off, you'd get plateaus or maybe even worse, valleys, taken away from the tension, or worse, completely severing it. So for Guts fighting the mercenaries, the most boring or flatline outcome would be if he just frags all the mercenaries with no problem at all. For a storyline with plateaus and valleys, it would be something like he gets one of his arms cut off, still fights no problem. Gets stabbed completely through his torso multiple times, still continues to kill the mercenaries. His legs and remaining arm break. He not only continues to wield his giant sword, but continues to frag the mercenaries, buffing Guts to some godlike being that can't be stopped, and in turn also making the enemy, a crucial component to action, seem like nothing more than a stupid little bug. Then, when Kasuga arrives with reinforcements, he's still alive. Believability holds crucial cadence to an action storyline, pacing being a crucial component to believability, and believability a crucial component to tension for action to be effective in storytelling. Using this action storyline example, let's recap the Guts vs 100 Mercenaries scene and what makes it work. It begins in episode 11 when Guts takes the arrow shot from Adon Korbelwitz to save Kasuga. Then they both fall off the cliff into the river below. This is the first stepping stone or starting point that leads to Guts versus the 100 mercenaries. Guts saves Kasuga, brings her to a cave, and keeps her warm and safe. Although there is a break here from the action, this is a good thing because it paces the suspense, creating a natural lull before the next action sequence. A lull that gives a perfect opportunity to deepen characterization. At no point did this feel forced or contrived. I'll label this as a plateau, but again, I don't think this is a bad thing at all. The suspense remains in the background. Then when they decide to leave the cave, it's apparent that Kasuga's physical state is still in rough shape. She is really struggling just to walk, keeping the audience's interest with smaller suspenseful incidents. They get ambushed. Kasuga's physical state only worsens. Samson and Guts' arrow wound from episode 11. Guts takes another arrow wound to the bicep. Kasuga runs for reinforcements. Guts' sword becomes dull. Adon Korbelwitz gives the mercenaries a lot more incentive to kill Guts. Kasuga is barely getting away from the mercenaries. Guts takes an arrow to his left hand. The quick edits between Guts and Kasuga ramp up the urgency and pace to its highest. Kasuga gets caught. The episode ends at the peak of suspense. Kasuga is saved, but I don't think this is a plateau in the tension because Guts is still fighting. All night fighting, crippling exhaustion, the climax reveal. Now, let's see the Uvojin versus Kurapica fight. Kurapica punches Uvojin in the face when he was locked up and defenseless on the table, giving Uvojin motive to fight Kurapica. The two agree to fight in a remote location. They kickstart the actual fight with just some flashy moves, a simple way of showing the audience the chains have some kick to them. I'm going to put Uvojin's lack of knowledge of the chains as a plateau, because Togashi wrote himself into a corner here. Because if the chains wreck Uvojin physically the strongest of the spider troop with brawn, then that would completely sever the tension almost immediately into the fight. The other problem that comes with this is that, okay, so if the chains can't dominate Uvojin physically, what can they do? It has to be something with aura. And again, that's when things get arbitrary. Kurapica gets punched in the arm by Uvojin, but what tension that created is immediately thrown out the window when Kurapica is literally brushing himself off after taking the hit. That was only 20% of my power. This is a valley because of how contrived it is. The character always being able to go harder really hurts the tension, to put it lightly. Kurapica beats the shit out of Uvojin with just punching and kicking. For some reason, Kurapica is better than Uvojin at this sort of stuff, dealing a heavy blow to believability, hurting the tension. Apparently, this is Uvojin's all, which is just not true, causing the punch's outcome to be contrived, hurting the tension. The argument could be had that Kurapica taking the hit increases the tension because it broke his arm. I'll give it to this argument, making the tension that we lost from the contrived outcome even out the action storyline back to flat. Invisible chains. Minus tension. While Kurapica has Uvojin chained up, the tension to the action scene is completely severed when he reveals that when his eyes turn scarlet, he becomes a specialist, meaning at this point, anything can happen and all tension is lost, killing the action storyline. So, let's compare the two. I asked myself, is it fair to compare these two action scenes? One takes place over a few episodes, while the other is only like half of one. So then I asked myself, what action scenes are there in Hunter x Hunter where it's one character against several others? The only one that I could think of, and even then it's technically not a 1v100, for example, is when Gon, Killua, and Kite are on their way to the Chimera Ant Nest, and Kite kills a shitload of Chimera Ants with one scythe chop. Netero vs. Meruem. I'm not going to do an in-depth analysis of this fight like I did the previous two in this video. I really like Netero as a character. I think he is a shining example of what Hunter x Hunter does best, and that's character design and in turn story world. Most of the time in Hunter x Hunter, just enough information about a character is given for the audience to fill in the blanks with their imagination. I am a big fan of this in storytelling. When the chairman is introduced to the series, it piqued my imagination, asking questions like, of all the powerful hunters that exist, how did this guy become the chairman? What kind of things did he have to do to earn that status? How powerful is he? As the story progressed and more characters were introduced, this only got better. It's unfortunate because, in my opinion, Netero as a character is thrown into the trash. What do I mean by this? Let's start off with the build-up to the Netero vs. Meruem fight. I think this was well done, because again, there was a lot of room for the audience to fill in the gaps with their own imagination. Netero was going up against a godlike being, yet, for at least me personally, it never felt like he was for sure going to lose. The fight itself has a lot of the problems of the Kurapica vs. Uvojin fight, but on a larger scale. For example, the problem of anything can happen is much worse. Also with the Netero vs. Meruem fight, the narrator is involved only to tell the audience what is happening rather than showing what is happening. For example, the entirety of Netero's aura with a merciless roar. This writing is very novice and I'd argue not good. Using a narrator in this capacity only takes away from the narrative's significance. There's no reason for the narrator to exist. Imagine how much worse the Guts vs. 100 Mercenaries sequence would be if every time a narrator said Casca was exhausted or Guts was injured. Or take it even a step further, which the narrator would do in Hunter x Hunter, and tell the audience the emotions of a character, how Casca feels every time Guts takes an arrow for her. The miniature rose bomb. This is dumb. This is where Togashi begins to completely throw away Netero as a character. Any hunter could have done this, thus diminishing Netero's significance as a character. The argument could be had, well, Netero is significant because ultimately he killed Meruem. The bomb's poison is what killed the king, not Netero. Again, any hunter could have boofed the bomb and had the same result Netero had. I think by having an attack unique to Netero, one of his attacks like the Merciless Roar, be the reason why Meruem ultimately died, rather than just it being a boofed bomb that any hunter could have used, would have made Netero not only way cooler and significant, but also I think that it is a much more natural way the narrative could have played out, rather than the bomb that was extremely contrived. Then there's one of, if not the biggest Deus Ex Machinas I have seen, when Poof and Yuppie revive Meruem. It was obvious that Togashi wanted the scene with Komugi and Meruem dying together, but this has to be the worst way to do it. By doing this, the fight with Netero loses all significance. Then, All of the story that involves the king after this revival is going to be contrived and anything can happen. Everything means nothing because the story's plot can just be flip-flopped around at any time. Gon versus Pitou. This fight and everything that came of it felt like the goal was to get Gon to go into that crazy mode, and creating contrived plot points to do so didn't matter as long as Gon going Super Saiyan was showcased. What do I mean by this? Let's start with Kite. Kite was not a special character. He was introduced into the story very late and had no time to develop before his death. It's not that I didn't like Kite as a character, it's just that I don't think he had significance. It felt like the only reason why Kite was a thing was for Gon to go Super Saiyan. Take away him being the reason why Gon went Super Saiyan, and what is he? Forgettable more than anything else. Is it fair to take that away from Kite's character? I think it is, yes. Because of the scale of Gon's reaction. Gon's reaction felt forced. Rather, the reason for his reaction didn't seem appropriate for his reaction. Let's treat it as a scale that measures weight. On one side of the scale, you have the cause to Gon's reaction, and on the other side, you have Gon's reaction. For this scene to be more effective with its narrative, you want this scale to be balanced. It doesn't have to be perfectly balanced, you just don't want either side to weigh out the other too much. Otherwise, the resulting narrative becomes contrived. So if Kite doesn't balance out this scale, who would balance out this scale? Gon's dad, Jing? This wouldn't work for a few reasons. One problem would be the same as Kite. It would be a character with no development, resulting in a shallow death. The second problem is that Jing is the main driving force for the plot. If Pitou killed Jing, it would be a very different story. The third problem is that if Pitou killed Jing, it would be incredibly lame. Jing is an imperative character to the story. The idea of Jing being a mysterious, legendary hunter is a massive interaction Hunter x Hunter as a story has with its audience. So if it were Pitou, some random ant that killed Jing just because they got close to the nest would be severely disappointing. If it can't be Jing, then who else? Gon's aunt, whatever her name is? That would be way too contrived, shallow, and cheap. In my opinion, the only character that would work here would be Killua. Gon and Killua's relationship has the most narrative weight by far. Killua being killed instead of Kite would be the only way to balance out the scale. That completely aside, another problem with this action sequence is the fundamental problem that all other action has in Hunter x Hunter. That is, anything can happen. What the fuck is this? This is the most extreme example. Apparently, this is a thing that can happen. At no point in the anime series was this mentioned or showed another character doing this. The only similar thing that I can think of was with Gon's and Killua's mentor, Biscuit. But from my understanding, she put some sort of illusion Nen spell that just changed her appearance and nothing more. The argument, well, he's never going to be able to use Nen again. He's using all of his entire life's Nen in one fight, is dumb. So anyone can do this and attain a power equivalent to the Chimera Ant King by putting this condition on the fight? Regardless, any sort of scraps of tension that might remain after the fight are completely severed when Aluka revives Gon. Yay, another Deus Ex Machina smile. There are things Hunter x Hunter does really well with, the character design and story world. However, what is Hunter x Hunter without its action? Because in my opinion, that is what Nen does to the story.